A lot going on. Guess what? They just signed a new law authorizing the U.S. military to go after citizens and murder us. Imagine that, right? And then this new law, I don't have the number in front of me. I've got it somewhere around here. But anyway, so they just signed this new law to authorize, you realize that a lot of the U.S. cops are ex-military. Good luck sleeping tonight. Anyway, so then Trump is talking about going after people using the military. Well, imagine that. Well, as a backup plan, they always have that Kigali thing to put UN troops on the streets here. The United States is going down, down, down. I've called it for years. But today we're going to talk a little bit about the fake history. It appears to me, at least this old lady here in Coven in Nebraska, that people don't trust history. They think it might be wrong, but yet they listen to people on social media guess about what those sketches mean. Sketches, yes, sketches. They look at thousands of year sketches somebody cooked up and put some music to it, and they talk about Tartaria. What's going on with Tartaria? Well, probably the truth, right? And now they have just muddled it to make it look like it's not the truth. I think Tartaria is very likely real. And no, I didn't get here by watching a bunch of YouTube videos. If you want to do that, well, then you're going to be more and more and more confused. It looks pretty simple to me, at least. I was looking at a timeline of things, and I saw the logo from Tartaria. Imagine that. It was that griffin, Griffin. That is their logo for Tartaria. Who else has that logo? Well, funny you should ask. The City of London also uses the griffin as their logo. Imagine that. I'll have more on the griffin later. Imagine them using the exact same logo from the City of London to Tartaria. See any connections starting to brew in your brain right now? Yes, that logo. And also that fez hat. That fez hat I've been chasing for a very long time now. Well, there's a reason for all of this because, in fact, the Pilgrims also played the role of the Moors, the black folks. Of course, the two things can happen at the same time, right? So the Moors and the Pilgrims are the same entity. They also did time as those Ashkenazi Jews. All kinds of thoughts about this Tartaria business, all kinds of confusing thoughts, and I'll share some of them with you right now. And then I'll get over to my timeline and you'll see where I found the, let's say, the bug in the system here, right? There are people that consider this rewriting of history. There's this group called, I don't know what to call these people, but this is the 1,000-year group. And they believe, and remember, the Bushes are always talking about the 1,000 lights, right? So first we have this 1,000-year group. They believe if Jesus Christ was a literal king on earth for a continuous 1,000 years, then is there any evidence that shows him in this role? Good question, right? What evidence that he was the king for 1,000 years? And they go on to say, we look at the past with the understanding that the first resurrection already occurred approximately 1,200 years ago. And I will be bringing us back to focus on this resurrection. I'll continue reading. The people who took part in this event received new bodies and are now referred to as saints, meaning holy ones. This group of people lived and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years and still live to this present day, as they are now immortal. We take a look at relics or the physical remains of saints, and we ponder the true importance of these objects, as it seems that relics truly act as a conduit between mortals and God. Of course, not all of the information can be found in the Bible. Some bits and pieces come from the early church historians, that they are also then corroborated by repetitive themes throughout the artwork of the kingdom period. So what they're claiming is that everything didn't come out of that Bible, But there were some bits and pieces from early church historians, right? Another reliable source, right? Church historians. And then they also claim that these bits and pieces are corroborated by repetitive themes throughout the artwork of the kingdom period. What have I been saying for years? This is a cut and paste operation. But I'll keep reading with this little theory here. Before diving into the theory, we need to understand a few important events mentioned in the Bible. The tribulation, they all talk about that tribulation that, I don't know, Christians undergo intense trials under the Antichrist and his followers. I'm not going to go through this whole list because it's kind of crazy, right? But we get to, they also are talking about this final judgment. I've been saying this is the end of the chapters, right? Their view on that is Satan will break loose and plan a war on the followers of God and Jerusalem. At this time, God will defeat Satan and his armies and proceed with the final judgment. Unbelievers will experience the second death, and Satan and the unholy Trinity will be thrown into the lake of fire. The old earth and old heavens will pass away, and God will introduce the new earth and new heavens. Sounds pretty involved and pretty dramatic, right? They also talk about he's going to come flying down out of the sky. Any of this going to happen? I don't know. How about if we look at it this way? If we look at it that we are in fact on a game board and we come from an advanced society, this whole picture starts to change what they're talking about as far as this Tartaria business, right? And they're talking about Tartaria was this advanced society, so advanced that it came to its demise. Some theories are out there that they turned the energy that these Tartarian plays were doing, they turned it against the people and actually murdered everyone. That theory kind of makes sense to me because right now, what are they doing? They're trying to murder us by infusing smart meter radiation and plutonium into our homes. So it looks like the same old trick being replayed. So were the people during Tartaria murdered by some of these energy weapons that they had? They were energy things in churches and stuff? Could happen. Could have happened that way. But if you look at it from the perspective that it was just a game board, okay, there's a possibility that we have been returning to this place as part of our spiritual development, but we come from a highly advanced society. So one possibility seems to be that maybe the people, when they were coming down here and doing this reincarnation, they were actually all working towards seeing if they could develop the same thing on the game board as we have in our real home. And while they were doing that on the game board, the people, if you want to call them the Tartarians, the Jews, whoever, whatever name you would have put on these people plotted our demise by turning this technology on us and did wipe out people. So then, of course, they then became the inhabitants of those homes. They did not build those homes. That's why just randomly you find just structures around this country, this big castle-like place out in the middle of nowhere. Where'd that come from? Well, probably somebody from that era actually built that home. And they're trying to present it like, well, it was all done with horses and buggies because there were no cars. Well, of course there were cars and things that they had knowledge of that they were using to build those homes. But when they started to tell this story, the story didn't quite make as much chaos and craziness. They had to take away those vehicles that were used to transport those things to all of those facilities. Because, for example, I started exploring those mental institutions in this country a few years ago. I have shows about them. And I was always struck by the fact that these were clearly not built to be mental institutions. And the other thing that was clear to me at the time was how did they build them? Not possible by the horse and buggy. So from that point, I basically moved on. Well, Tartaria is just a money grubbing machine on social media. One kid that I was looking at a few years ago had a channel on YouTube about his guitar, playing his guitar. Had a couple thousand viewers, a couple thousand subs. He would get about 30 or 40 views per video he would upload about his guitar, playing his guitar, right? Well, all of a sudden, this same kid starts showing pictures of Tartaria and playing his music, twang, 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 while everybody's looking at old sketches, okay? Well, that channel went from, 30 or so views per video to thousands and thousands of views because that kid was able to combine his skills with that guitar with showing old sketches. So there's money in these stories. They like to drag things out because there's more money in them for the person doing the talking. Like, for example, when I got to the point that I figured that most all true crime was fake, I did a video saying it's all fake, right? I didn't just slug it out. Well, this week I'm going to be talking about this murder case. Next week, I'll be talking about this murder case. That is what the social media game also is. They are also hiding things they claim they're finding, right? So anyway, so then I started really wandering around because remember, I've been talking a lot about these bombings of places like Dresden and Wuhan, China, along with Japan. Well, why are they bombing all these places? Likely they're bombing these places to destroy old evidence. Like, why would they bomb Dresden? Well, there's a pretty strong connection with the Saxon group up in Dresden. So obviously there was some history there that they needed to move in and bomb. But first, let me go over and so my theory now is that the wars 100% were to take us out, murder us, called kill boxes, and the other more specific reason, the murder part was kind of like just a bonus along the way. The real reason was to destroy all of these old places. Just like they used the earthquake in San Francisco in 1906 to steal that huge piece of land. I've talked about that land for years now called Hetch Hetchy. Well, what was buried under Hetch Hetchy that they had to flood and destroy is my question now. It always struck me as odd that they stole that particular piece of land during the San Francisco earthquake. Well, probably because it was something is under that water. So let me get over to my timeline here. And we'll take a little wander here. I was putting together some things on my website under the tab called Who Are the Royal Monsters Running the World? And some things became clear to me. It appeared to me that during certain eras, there was an effort to round up the black people. I'll get to that here in a second. So in order to wind it all the way back, I started off with what is Tartary? Tartary was a large territory that extended into Europe from the Middle Ages to the 19th century, that era that we're roaming around, right? So, right off the bat, I happened to notice that the logo that they're using for the Tartaria is a griffin. If you looked at my website and looked under the tab called How Elites are all anyway, the tab for the elites, I have pictures of the griffin right outside of the city of London. So I thought, wow, the Tartarian people use the griffin, and the city of London used the griffin too. Imagine that. Just like the tea company, British tea company, ended up with a flag for United States, just almost exactly like that flag. And just like when they took over the Middle East, they just so happened to make all of those flags for the Middle East just sort of look the same color code, right? This is a cut and paste operation. So they say these griffins are a representative of a half lion, half eagle, and they become a literal symbol of Jesus's half human, half divine nature. In Dante's Divine Comedy, a griffin leads the chariot through the earthly paradise after the heroes arise from the hell of purgatory. So a griffin is leading this chariot, okay? Some historians point to the Levant, the region around the Aegean Sea, as a place of the origin of the griffin. It was popular in the region around 2000 BCE and known in every part of the Western, also spelled as Griffon or Grippon. The mythological, you hear the first part of that word, right? Mythological. The first part means myth, right? This creature was seen as a guardian of treasures and priceless possessions. Well, it's guarding City of London where they take most of the loot that they steal from the world, right? In the context of ancient Egyptian mythology, the griffin was known as a composite creature with a falcon head, which was considered to be a form of the deity Horus. It is intriguing to notice the resemblance between the Egyptian depiction of a griffin and the symbol of a falcon representing the king, which reinforces the significance of this mythical creature in ancient Egyptian culture. This indicates a possible connection between these ancient civilizations and the representation of mythical creatures. One of the most prominent motifs in the ancient Middle East and Mediterranean areas, the griffin was a hybrid beast that had great significance. The griffin held a special significance in the representation of the Ka, the soul of life force of the Egyptian king. It was believed to be a guardian and protector of the divine essence of the ruler, symbolizing strength, authority, and the majestic powers associated with the pharaoh. The Egyptian influence on the depiction and symbolism of the griffin is evident through its association with Horus. That's Horus, its connection to the Sphinx, and its representation of the Ka of the king. These elements contribute to the deep-rooted culture and mythological importance of the ancient Egyptian griffins. So obviously, griffins weren't just randomly put on the Tartaria flag, and they just weren't randomly erected there in the city of London. The Greco-Roman gods were an interesting combination of good blessings and human flaws, and for this reason, griffins were important creatures to them. Griffins were commonly described as companions of Zeus, king of the gods and savior of the world from the Titans. They were associated with Apollo, god of the sun, music, and medicine in some depictions. Engraving or decorations of griffins adorned the helmet of the protector goddess Athena. However, griffins sometimes also served Nemesis, the god of revenge, suiting their ruthlessness to those who threatened their treasures. They also sometimes pulled the chariot of the sun, shared by Apollo and Helios. Is a legendary creature with the body, tail, and back legs of a lion, the head and wings of an eagle, and sometimes an eagle's talons as its front feet. because the lion was traditionally considered the king of the beasts and the eagle the king of the birds. By the Middle Ages, the griffin was thought to be an especially powerful and majestic creature. Since classical antiquity, griffins were known for guarding treasures and priceless possessions. In Greek and Roman texts, griffins and these armicipians were associated with gold deposits of Central Asia. Indeed, as Pliny the Elder wrote, griffins were said to lay eggs in burrows on the ground, and these nests contained gold nuggets. In medieval history, the griffin became a Christian symbol of divine power and guardian of the divine. In Tartarian legend of this period, it was believed that griffins mated for life, and that when one partner died, the other would live the rest of his or her life without seeking another partner. This has led to claim that the griffins were used by the church as a symbol against remarriage. However, it is unclear, whether this was an actual belief or just a modern interpretation. Although the griffin might seem like a creature conjured from the imagination of mankind, there might also be some truth to this creature. So there's this thing in the city of London. They have this term. It's called East of the Griffin. Was once commonly employed to mean east of the Temple Bar, which is the city of London. The city of London is the original heart of London, that having been established by the Romans in 55 BC. You know, the city of London, the Vatican, and Washington, D.C. So they first started using the griffin. This gives us another date to work on. They say in 1100. The red cross on a white background represents St. George's Cross, which is also featured on England's national flag. The griffins flanking the shield represent not only strength. The griffin can be found in various architectural elements throughout the city. Many grand buildings and landmarks feature sculptures or reliefs of griffins. The mythical creature represents the city's history, strength, and resilience. Griffins are legendary creatures, often seen as symbols of strength and courage, but do they actually exist? They were seen as symbols of strength and guardianship, often protecting large amounts of wealth or important places. One of the most famous references to the griffin in the Bible can be found in the book of Isaiah. It says the prophet describes a vision of 4 living creatures with the faces of a lion, an ox, an eagle, and a man. Of course, many scholars believe that the creature was the face of a lion represents the griffin, symbolizing God's power and protection over his people. It's also mentioned in the book of Revelation. And what does it say? It says, the Apostle John sees a vision. Well, that's the same as the last one. Okay, so they saw 2 of them, right? Well, I honestly think that if you are inclined to believe this whole Tartaria thing, I'm going to take a wild guess here. I'm going to guess most of the people huddled around social media listening to people talk about Tartaria likely have a strong connection with the Bible, right? Because if you believe the Bible, then you believe in sketches, old stories, and history, right? You believe those things through and through. So to sell you Tartaria and all this stuff would seem like if they make it like the Bible and mix in all this other stuff, there you got your audience, right? The Griffin is also featured in the Harry Potter and Percy Jackson series and a range of video games and board games. Yeah, Dungeons and Dragons. In fact, the Griffin is more or less a staple of modern fantasy artwork and literature, in large part because of what it symbolizes and its unique look. I only found the griffins on the flag of Estonia. They have some internal security force. In 2000, they adopted the griffin. But you'll also find griffins all over the place. Disneyland has a bunch of griffin logos. Griffins appear in the staircases. Griffin statues are encountered outside the attractions. The California version of the attraction featured a griffin statue standing on a sign leading to a fast pass entry. Another thing, if we're talking about buried history, what is beneath all of these theme parks and stuff, right? All of this public land they were in a rush to declare public. Were they declaring all of these parks and stuff as public land because they wanted to give us a place to go out and stretch our feet and smell the grass? It does not fit with their personalities. These same people who want to eke and rob and steal every single thing they get their hands on, do you really now believe that they came up with all these parks and stuff, like where people could go? Like, I don't know, there's parks all over this country. What's underneath all those parks? What's underneath all the places they selected to put military bases on? Pretty easy to start putting things on top of things if you know what you're covering up, right? And I'll be getting back to Dresden in a bit here. So we have the Tartaria people suspiciously around the same time as that printing press came up, right? Because supposedly Tartaria was early, I just say it was done around the 1400s before the rest of the stuff came up. So then conveniently, the printing press happens around the end of this Tartaria business, right? So the first book to be printed was a Latin language Bible printed in Mainz, Germany. And I already covered the Bible. Nevertheless, the invention of the movable type printing press meant that Bibles and books could finally be effectively produced in large quantities in a short period of time. This was essential to the success of the Reformation. Well, of course it was. That was a key point in time. They went to press with that Bible. How hard? We're looking at a core group of about 300 people, right? How hard if you get 300 fairly smart people to begin with? They've all kind of become idiots now, but let's say back then they were much smarter than this. Well, how hard would it be? Because you had all the tools you were hiding from everybody else, right? How hard would it be to sit around a group of us and say, yeah, we're going to come up with this history. First, we're going to invent the Bible. In order for everybody to imprint that history on their minds, we're going to print them. We're going to make sure everybody reads that Bible, right? So, of course, it was successful to the Reformation. And then we have the Tartaria, the modern Turkey flag was adopted in 1936. So why was that? There were a number of legends explaining the flag's origin, including one in which the founder of the Ottoman Empire, Sultan Osman I, had a dream where he saw a crescent and star rising from the chest of a judge whose daughter he wanted to marry. Always with the crazy stories, right? They always come up with these insane stories. So this Ottoman Empire Sultan, in this dream, he sees a crescent and a star rise from the chest of a judge whose daughter he wanted to marry. Others believe that during the 1448 Battle of Kosovo between the Ottoman Empire and a Christian coalition, a reflection of a star and moon was seen in a pool of blood. That's a better story, right? More dramatic. It adds a better touch to have it sitting in that pool of blood. In modern interpretations, the red color used in the flag represents the blood of soldiers who fought for Turkey's independence during the First World War. Ottoman Empire, historically and colloquially known as the Turkish Empire, was an empire centered in Anatolia that controlled much of the Southeast Europe, West Asia, and North Africa from the 14th to the 20th century. It also controlled parts of Southeast Central Europe between the early 16th and 18th century. So here we are, right at that time frame. This happens to be a couple hundred years ago, right? So how hard would it be to mold all this together? Well, somebody gave me an interesting name. And right around that same time, over there in Turkey, they had this person called Shabbat Tuzi, Tzvi. I think that was where they started with Zionism. Ottoman Jewish mystic and ordained rabbi from Smyrna. His family origins may have been Ashkenazi or Spanish. Yeah, imagine that. That same region where they were trolling around in, right? Active throughout the Ottoman Empire, Zevi claimed to be the long-awaited Jewish Messiah and founded the Sabbatur movement. The Jewish communities of Amsterdam, Hamburg, Altonia, Frankfurt, and Maine were all taken over by the supporters of Shabbat Zevi. It's Zevi. So this is how the story goes, right? I think what was happening was they said the Sultan of Turkey watched the Shabbat Zevi phenomena unfold for 7 years. He did not oppose it because of all the money it was bringing into Turkey. Shabbat Zevi was a remarkable tourist attraction. Jews came from all over the world and they left large sums of money. Shabbat Zevi himself kept the pretense going by paying off all the police and governors. They all had to give their cut back to the Sultan, so he was happy to look the other way. However, the success of Shabbat Zevi eventually forced his hand because the Muslims came to him and complained that he was going to kick them out of Jerusalem and recapture it from the Turks and prove the truth of Judaism over Islam. The Sultan was frightened of unloosing the wrath of the Muslim fundamentalists. I think what he was doing was this. They come up with this mystic, right? Everybody wants to go there and explore things. I'll give you some money if you'll tell me the truth. Well, what also can you develop out of that? Well, how about a list of all the Jews, right? So let's say on the game board, there were actual Jews, the ones who had accumulated all that wealth they went to steal during World War II. Let's say this Shabbat Zevi guy was there to take notes. Who are these Jews, right? Gather them all into that Ottoman area to get their names. Just a passing thought. Then, of course, we have Martin Luther, the Reformation. But before Martin Luther, there was Erasmus, a Dutch theologian who paved the way for the Protestant Reformation, which I am declaring was the switch and the flip to Satanism. So, Martin Luther, already talked a great deal about Martin Luther. Around the same time, they came out with this iModi, the 16 Pleasures and Erotic album. That's when they came up with all the graphic sex guides. First published 1524, starting to get their sins loaded up, right? They're trying to get ready for those confessionals, so they got to know what sins to trap people with, right? Get them doing some sins that nobody's ever heard of but these people, right? The root of evil is what we're looking at. Then, of course, after all that, they just happened to take the commissioning of the King James Bible. I swear, Bible people are always raving about that KJV Bible. But really, you know what amazes me? Remember, I was raised in a house that a Bible never darkened our doorstep, okay? So, but people love that KJV Bible, and the people that love it don't even understand that the King James Bible is the only Bible that they monetize. Starting to sound familiar here, right? The commissioning of the King James Bible took place in 1604, not that long ago, at the Hampton Court Conferences outside of London. The first edition appeared in 1611. See, just in time for those printing presses. The King James Version remains one of the most significant landmarks in the English tongue. It has decidedly affected our language and thought categories. And although produced in England for English churches, it played a unique role in the historical development of America. KJV Bible. And then around the same time, imagine that the Pilgrims landed here 1620 and they founded Plymouth Colony. See, just shocking how this happens all at the same time, right? Then, of course, around the same time, the East India Company, they founded 1600. Gee, right on the heels of all this stuff, they just get the energy to start going to there, looking into India and different places, right? Where were they before all this time? Who knows, right? So the East India Company gets created in the 1600 by Queen Elizabeth, and they dissolve it in 1858. Kind of a funny time to dissolve it, right? Oh, they had other things to worry about by that time. They had the United States to worry about by that time. If you look at a map of India, do you realize that who was the richest country in the 1700s? It was India. India was the richest country in the world. So here we almost look like we're starting to partition off the black people, right? India, black people. For over 1700 years, well, according to historians, India was the richest country, while China was at second spot, and the USA was the poorest country in the world with GDP less than 1%. Did you hear that last part? For over 1700 years, India was the richest country. China was number 2. USA was the poorest country in the world with a GDP of less than 1%. Gee, I wonder who would be motivated to change history. India's trade was in a healthy state, and it became the largest economy by 1700s, amounting to almost 27% of world GDP until the mid-18th century, prior to British rule. So now we have to start wondering, did the British rule India to subjugate and control those brownish skinned people? Pretty strong possibility, right? It's like a 2-for-1, right? They can destroy the population and they can steal all their money. Way to go, way to go, way to go. So then we barely get these people over here, and guess what the first American English Bible was? Well, it was Luther's German translation, printed amazingly in 1743. It was much later in the colonial period in 1782 when the first complete King James Bible was actually printed in America. Prior to that time, English Bibles were readily available as imports from England, and the English crown owned the copyright on the printing of the King James Version. They say the turning point when the company started to rule territories in India. So after the Battle of Plassey in 1757 was the big turning point in India. Convenient date, right? And right around the same time, the fake Boston Tea Party, 1773, is going on. Imagine that. Oh, and looky here, 1773, the very first hospital built in America specifically for the confinement and treatment of the mentally ill. Before the construction of this facility, individuals who suffered mental illness were not diagnosed by a physician knowledgeable in such conditions, but judged by a jury of 12 citizens to be either criminal, lunatic, or idiots. They say it was built in 1773. Well, they can say a lot of things, right? So what happened around the same time? Well, imagine this. Right around the same time, over in Iran, after they're conquering the Middle East, originally a chieftain in this branch of the Khajar tribe was enthroned as the king of Iran in 1789, but was not officially crowned until March of 1796. And Aga Muhammad Khan Qajar was famously the Yuk monarch, being castrated as a toddler upon his capture by Adil Shah, and hence was childless. So right at the same time, the ruler of Iran just happens to be a Yuk, right? You start to see some intersections of history that just may have taken place, right? Then, of course, we had the Opium Wars from 1644 to 1911. Boy, imagine that. Wipe out China with drugs. Just like they're now saying China is flooding the United States with drugs. I guess that goes for the old saying, turnabout is fair play. So they went in there and had a bunch of conflicts over trying to get China high with opium. Well, imagine that, right? In the mid-19th century, from the Qing dynasty, which ruled from 1644, right at that exact same time, just like they were just trying to control that entire population in China, put them into a stupor for a couple hundred years, right? So, but in 1858, the company lost its administrative function due to the British government after its Indian soldiers mutinied. Well, yeah, uprisings do pay off. They do pay off. Sitting in chairs and watching the uprising happen isn't really a significant role, but hey, you do you. So then this Indian uprising, right? Well, so they eventually, it looks to me like they kept China in a coma with the opium, right? Keep that whole population quiet. Then around the same time, let me see here. So, of course, the Dutch East India Company, they were weighed down by smuggling, corruption, and growing administrative costs in the late 18th century. The company went bankrupt and was formally dissolved in 1799. Its possessions and debt were taken over by the government of the Dutch Batavian Republic, which brings us to the Netherlands, Belgium, and Germany, some very significant areas that they obviously want to wipe out, right? So then around that same time frame, I've talked over and over again about all of the census records that just happened to go missing. Another way to hide history, right? Get rid of all those people that were obviously complaining, right? So then around the same time, I think it was 1897, no, 1897, they had a mandatory first vaccination. In 1810, they started vaccinating us against smallpox. Imagine that. Then, of course, if you look at the uniforms of the American Patriot soldier and the British Redcoat soldier, kind of start to wonder, the same factory clearly could have designed both of these flags, both of these uniforms, right? Cut and paste operation. Also known as the Revolutionary War or American War of Independence. The war ended with the Treaty of Paris in 1783. Problem is, the U.S. lost the war. So there we have everybody fighting around the same time frame, right? Then, of course, what's going on in Haiti? Another place where they were locking up the black people, or so it appears to me. Now, granted, everybody has to decide for themselves. But here again, the recorded history of Haiti began in 1492. Very convenient timing, when the European navigator Christopher Columbus landed on a large island. And Haiti was also the richest country. Before the people enslaved in Haiti to work, excuse me a second. The French colonized Haiti in 1804, but at that time, Haiti ranked as the world's richest and most productive colony. So all of a sudden, Haiti's got to go too, right? These enslaved people. Then what they do next? Well, they burned down the Capitol in Washington, D.C. They burned down the Capitol during the War of 1812. The burning of Washington in 1814 by British troops. The burning of Washington. So they were given orders, this is good, to burn only public buildings. So they say that was credited with preserving most residences. But as a result, the facilities of the U.S. government, including the White House, were largely destroyed. One way to clean it up, right? Good old fire. Fire is always a good method for these people, right? So what was this War of 1812 about? Well, I don't know. It's pretty confusing, but it was against the United States and its allies against the UK and its allies in North America. It began when the United States declared war on Britain, 18 June 1812. Although peace terms were originally agreed upon in 1814, the war did not officially end. I don't know. It gets too confusing. Okay, so what else was burned up? Well, conveniently, in 1814, during the war with Great Britain, the people that had the same flag and the same uniforms, I imagine there should have been some confusion on the field, right? Oh, that guy over there in the red and blue uniform. Oh, no, wait a minute. That's a Brit. Oh, no, wait a minute. There's a guy in a red and white. That's an American. No, that's a Brit, too. In 1814, during the war with Great Britain, the soldiers marched into Washington, set fire to the Capitol, and destroyed the Library of Congress. So every book they had got burned up. Nothing suspicious about that. Then 1845, they cook up Manifest Destiny, which to me is the work of Satan, right? Manifest Destiny, the idea that Americans had been given America by God, who wanted them to settle it all and push out Indians and Mexicans. Yeah, pretty rough crowd here in this country, aren't they? If you have it, they want it, they'll murder you for it. As simple as that. So, by that little trick, they were able to double the size of the United States. Imagine that. So, they declare, because of Manifest Destiny, they made the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, which doubled the size of the U.S. Boy, that is very convenient. Got the books burned, got everybody under control, got the pesky black people over in Haiti under control. I'll get to Cuba here in a minute. But anyway, so yeah. And another very, very suspicious time, to me at least, the Trail of Tears, the forced displacement of approximately 60,000 people of the 5 civilized tribes between 1830 and 1850, and the additional thousands of Native Americans and their enslaved African Americans within that were ethnically cleansed. Because I got started by this because I read, I don't know, somewhere years ago that Black people were seen marching or participating in the Trail of Tears. The U.S. then took over Native Americans' land and made it available to mostly white settlers. Yeah, pretty convenient how that happened, right? Forced them off that land. So, and also remember, the British first landed on Indian territory in the 1600s, but their rule did not begin until the 1858. So between the 1600s and 1858, well, it was a way to suppress people, right? Another significant thing, the Circassians. Those Circassians, the Russian Circassian War was actually a very terrible disaster for the Circassians. I started off by following some white slave women being sold in Turkey, and I ended up with the Circassians. I would bet dollars to donuts most of those kids on those orphan trains were likely Circassians. So, the 100-year war that began in 1763, defeat of the Circassians, and in 1864, the region was completely annexed to the Russians. Pretty significant time, pretty huge movement of some pretty white people, if you ask me. I think these Black people, the MOORS, or, the people in charge now, they got together and thought, how do we really up this game? If everybody on the game board is Black, how about if some of us become white? Then we could claim that we're right. We're white because we're better than everybody else, right? Well, that seems to be the attitude, right? Manifest destiny. God told us to go take those brown people's land, and we're going to do it. Damn it. Doesn't matter how many of them we have to murder. That was God's decision. See how everything starts to run off course by that Bible and this God business, right? Now, obviously, I believe we have a creator, but this God person they're talking about, I believe, is code for Satan. Okay, so moving along here. The American Civil War. Imagine that, 1861 to 1865. There is a reason why they called it the Civil War. All those people, it went from 1861 to 1865. A lot of murder took place. A lot of people left and ran to those hills. Another key time to corral those Black people. And what about Cuba? If you block up Cuba, you got a whole bunch of Black people. You can keep them confined to that area. The Cuban War of Independence. 1868 to 1898. So, Cuba, another area of Black people they thrashed under control, right? And guess what? Who was founded right after all this stuff was happening? 1866, the Ku Klux Klan, using those white hoods, that Malta logo on their chest. I kid you not. The first Klan was founded in Pulaski, Tennessee on December 24th, 1865. It started as a fraternal social club, inspired at least in part by the then largely defunct Sons of Malta. Then, December 1865, the Congress of the Virginia Colony secretly rewrote the original Constitution. And it's about the 13th and 14th Amendment, covered a lot of that. Funny time that it happens, right? Start changing things around. The Transcontinental Railroad, 1868. I've been saying this for years. They've been rolling out this technology as they saw fit, right? 1871, the U.S. Treasury went bankrupt as a result of the Civil War. It sought help from global financiers such as the Rothschilds of London. Global bankers were eager to buy, and the Treasonous Act of 1871 was passed by the 41st Congress. The Constitution was altered, and America was transformed into a corporation. There is no federal government, only a corporation. Politicians do not serve we the people. They work for corporate America and no one else. You are their product. Look around. Everywhere you go, they are monetizing people, right? So back to this timeline. Funny thing, darker skinned people over there in Hawaii. Well, 1893, the United States stole Hawaii. I already covered that before, but this to me started to look more and more like corralling of black people, okay? And interestingly enough, all these Tartaria people are always talking about all these World's Fairs, right? They show endless pictures of World's Fair, not pictures, but sketches, right? Well, I found an old poster advertising the Brussels International Exposition in 1897. It was the first World's Fair, just so happened to be over in that region in Brussels. Another brown country, the Philippines. Well, once they turned themselves white, everything looked brown, right? So then they get the Philippines and get them under control with the Philippine-American Wars. And of course, they say they solved things in 1898. But remember, you're signing treaties with a bankrupt corporation. Now, I certainly am not an attorney, but I have to wonder if you sign deals with somebody who isn't even who they told you they were, are these deals even legitimate, right? So another part of history that became a way to corral all those black folks was those banana wars that I've talked about. Certainly got that under control, right? They claimed it was about the bananas, but it was probably about murdering the people, and there's probably things in that part of the country that needed destroying, right? And of course, 1880, we have the scramble for Africa. Where were they all this time? Oh, I get it. They were just taking over. So during the 1880s, they decided to start colonizing Africa. They were done by the 1940s. Another significant, huge swath of black people on the game board, right? All those people in Africa primarily are black, right? Well, what do? You go over and you divide it all up. You give them new borders, you give them new languages, you split them all to pieces. So now you got the black people in Africa under control, right? So, because prior to that, only 10% of the continent was being controlled by Europe, which makes perfect sense if you figure that during that time, they're whitening up their skin. So how did this all work? Well, we had the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age lasted from the 1800s to the early 1900s. I am going to say this. The Gilded Age, all those big, magnificent homes, those homes were already occupied by people who were then murdered by these people. They did not build those homes. Because interesting enough, they also talk about the Gilded Age as characterized by economic growth for the wealthy and extreme poverty for the working class. And that, the Gilded Age era, explains those mental wards out in the middle of nowhere. Those were somebody's homes. And to further wipe the map of black people, they had the Galveston hurricane of 1900. 1900 Galveston hurricane, also known as the Great Storm of 1900 or the 1900. It is still, to this day, and I just checked, the deadliest natural disaster in U.S. history. The strongest storm of the 1900 Atlantic hurricane season, it left between 6,000 and 12,000 fatalities in the U.S. Most of these deaths occurred in or near Galveston, Texas. And they had warnings. I've already talked about this. Supposedly they were warned. They seemed to brush off the warnings, and whoops, everything goes. So at that time, Galveston was their top, and I mean their top financial center. So what was there that needed wiping out? Well, if it was their top financial center, then I'd say probably the records, right? So then we have the Middle East, 1914 and 1922. They did the same thing to the Middle East that they did to Africa. They partitioned it. The partition of the Ottoman Empire, 30 October 1918 to 1 November 1922, occurred after World War I. So why'd that occur then? Another area to control and destroy, right? If they can control that area, then people in that area can't dig up history to prove they were there first, right? And I didn't include the San Francisco earthquake. I've talked about that endlessly. Another huge robbery. During that time, they wanted to steal what was going on in an area called Hetch Hetchy. Hetch Hetchy was described as more beautiful than the Grand Canyon. So the story goes like this. Before the San Francisco earthquake of 1906, they were trying to get legislation to flood Hetch Hetchy to provide water for San Francisco. Nobody wanted to do that. Nobody wanted to dam up that huge, beautiful piece of land. It was like the Indians' original place for healing and stuff. So what happened next? Well, of course, they had the San Francisco earthquake, which in effect was dynamite and fire. Even their own historians were amazed when they were going back and looking at San Francisco again. And they say things now like, wow, amazing. They were throwing dynamite into the fire. How could they be so stupid? They were being smart. So that asks the other question, comes back now. What was below? Oh, and let me finish the story. So anyway, so after San Francisco, when they couldn't get enough water to put out the fires, right, that they started and accelerated, then everybody thought taking over Hetch Hetchy was a good idea, so San Francisco would no longer have water trouble. See how it always works out that way, right? But now we should take a very, very sharp eye at what exactly was Hetch Hetchy about. They say it was a sacred place for the Indians. So what was being destroyed? And we're still chasing that same 300 families. In 1865, 300 families were granted immunity from the 14th Amendment. What's that all about? Why are they getting ahead of the thing, getting themselves out of the middle of it, right? Then, of course, the orphan trains between 1854 and 1929. They claim they relocated about 200,000 children. Where did all those children come from? I believe they came from the people that they killed during this so-called Civil War. But I believe a lot of those kids came out of the Circassian area because they wanted to populate with white people. Same way they populated Israel with local Muslim people. Everything that they conquered, they for some reason have had to conquer it using people they have stolen from someplace else, right? That's because there are not that many of them. So I'm at the part on my web page, and I'm going to be, if you scroll down below, there's a Zeus person, Israel Zeus, has a huge body of work, and basically he goes through the genealogy pretty much of these people. It basically is backing up what I've been saying all along. This is a mafia operation. That's why everything in this country has these weird deals going on, right? Like today, they said that there's not enough IV fluids in this country because of North Carolina. Well, because of how they do these mine arrangements, there's always a cut and a deal in the middle of all these. Our whole structure is mafia, but I'm not going to go there right this second. But anyway, so I would encourage you to look through all the information that he has provided with us. Now, we don't know who this person is. Maybe he's one of them and he got pissed off. I don't know. But here's a statement that came out of this looking. It says, many of the royal, noble, and priestly bloodlines are descendants of Arab or Moorish clans which invaded Europe, which is why they're trying to destroy European culture by bringing in large amounts of immigrants. So many of the royal, noble, and priestly bloodlines are descendants of Arab or Moorish clans which invaded Europe. The Moors and Arabs that invaded Europe around 700 AD raped women and were involved in a large sex slavery industry, trafficking white women and children into the Middle East. And that's where I picked up the story, right? Do I believe it happened over thousands of years? No, I really don't. These people are falling apart as I speak. There is no way that this has been going on forever. But of course, to tell this story, you have to develop all this genealogy, right? Define who your people are. Put up genealogy things on site. Get people to tell their genealogy. Make them big. Make them important, right? Make them rulers. So I think if you look through his work, it is very telling who exactly these people are and who they connect to. Nothing is good about any of this. It is pure evil. So I'm going to get back over here. So part of the reason I'm moving around a little bit today is because I lost a file. Yeah, over 100 pages of all this stuff. So I'm right now kind of reconstructing it. I've only ever lost one other file like this in the past, but it's because I don't have any administrative help. And that's a reason why I will likely stop sharing my work. But anyway, so let's get to Dresden. Why'd they bomb Dresden? Well, Dresden's rise to now. I landed on Dresden in Wuhan, China, because I was looking at the airplanes that they modified to drop all those bombs during Japan, which then brings more questions. What is in those areas in Japan that got bombed? Are there significant things in that area that got destroyed? Books, paperwork, all that stuff. Don't know. Okay, so Dresden, its rise to prominence came relatively late in the Middle Ages. In 1423, the ruler of Saxony was made an elector of the Holy Roman Empire. It wasn't until 1485 that the electors made the city their main place of residence. The late 17th century and first half of the 18th century was something of a golden age for Dresden, both in terms of its magnificent art and its architecture. So this was a time when the two electors also served as kings of Poland and thus controlled a huge empire. The first of the Polish monarchs was Augusta I, also known as Augusta the Strong. He was said to have gathered together in Dresden many fine artists, planners, and builders. In 1806, the Holy Roman Empire was dissolved as a consequence of the Napoleonic Wars. Dresden became an important base for the French emperor. Later, the elector in Dresden became the king of Saxony. You know, these Saxon people I keep talking about? So, in 1849, the city was unfortunately mixed up in the German revolutions, which led to much destruction. During the late 19th century, Dresden grew to become a major economic center, thanks largely to the arrival of industry in the city. In particular, it became known for its activities in the newly formed camera industry. In 1918, the last of the Saxon monarchs abdicated, and Saxony became part of Germany as the capital of the Free State of Saxony. In February of 1945, Dresden suffered terribly as a result of aerial bombardment by the World War II Allied forces. Literally, thousands of these citizens died in a firestorm. Indeed, estimates vary wildly from 30,000 to 130,000 people. Okay, listen up. Many of these cities' buildings were destroyed, although much of its artwork treasures managed to survive, having already been safely hidden away. Now, isn't that very convenient there, right? So 1945, when I talked about Dresden in the past, I thought they just picked out Dresden because they were testing. They bombed Dresden and they bombed Wuhan before they bombed Japan. So after the war, Dresden became part of a communist East Germany. A large part of the city remained as little more than rubble well into the 1950s. Eventually, many historic buildings were rebuilt, including the Swinger Palace. More modern developments also rose up at this time, although these were built to be more in keeping with socialist architectural styles. In the aftermath of the war, some of these bomb buildings were simply razed to the ground. So, with the Saxon people looming around that area, and now we're looming around Germany as being their key place, right? What was there that needed to be bombed? And if somebody were to take the interest, you could rinse and repeat this. Look at Vietnam. Look at all these places that got locked up. What historically might have been there? I think war has been a 2-for-1. Murder the people and destroy the evidence, right? So yeah, so they go on to say they reconstructed it. Anyway, so yeah, pretty interesting about Dresden, right? I don't think they were just bombing to test the planes. Also, let's not forget Saddam Hussein. Remember when they invaded Iraq? I remember this as clear as the day. When the U.S. invaded Iraq, the first place they demolished was the museum. They claimed that Saddam Hussein had one of the biggest collections of art in the entire Middle East. And just like that, they did nothing to protect it, and it all got destroyed. See how this is working out? Destroy, destruction, and deceit is what we're looking at. And I don't think it happened thousands of years ago. There's no way. There's absolutely no way. And I have some very good information to show you that the Pilgrims played the role of the Moors at one point in this. We're recapping here. So they were hiding under several things. One was the Moors. So I have all this stuff to get to try to explain to you what this Tartaria business is all about. I'm sure that I'm sure Tartaria may have been real. I'm sure that let me just read you this first part, and then I'm going to be needing to take a break here. What is Tartaria? Tartaria, originally pronounced Tartaria without the first R, is the name of the pre-Mongolian empire that originated in northern Asia before spanning the entire northern hemisphere. Great Tartaria was the largest empire during its time and would have still been the largest empire today. The Tartarian Empire flourished due to, in part, of the civilization being a leader in advanced technology, free energy, and grand architecture. Tartaria is also the Greek word Tartarus, the denotation of lost souls spending eternity in Tartaria's underworld is due to the Tartarian Empire having been buried and wiped out during the mud floods. See, one of their big philosophies is that these mud floods wiped it all out. And I'll keep reading here. It says, the world of the Tartarians is literally the world under our world, the underworld. Tartarus wasn't the underworld and will never be the underworld. Tartaria is the underworld. The religionists used the mud flood deluge and how it wiped out the Tartarian Empire to confuse the populace into thinking they would join those in the underworld if they challenged the religious authority. The Tartarians were the indigenous people, quite possibly, and this is, see, I'll just keep reading it like it's true, right? The Tartarians were the indigenous people, quite possibly founded by Noah's sons, making up the world-renowned Tartarian Empire. The Tartarians were a tall people, averaging some 8 to 12 feet in height. They would have been considered giants. Civilizations in the current astrological age, the age of Pisces, are shorter in height. Well, that's according to these people, right? The Tartarians are also thought to have been breathagogues, a being who does not rely on the digestion and burning of calories from food and water, but instead rather receives energy straight from the ether. The ether is thought to be the very fabric of the space-time continuum that some would associate with electrons, the wind, the Holy Spirit, the atmosphere, and the gases in the atmosphere, such as oxygen, nitrogen, and hydrogen. Since the Tartarians quite possibly had a completely altered digestive system than the one we have now, they had no need for toilets in their bathrooms, which could hint at one of the reasons why bathrooms in the recent past had been used quite extensively as social gathering powder rooms to not only freshen up, but to hear and spread local gossip. The Tartarians were masters of masonry, brickwork, steampunk-style technology, universally free energy, and grand architecture. Their Romanesque building architectures can still be found in the current guise as water ducts, city halls, banks, water stations, cathedrals, hospitals, and similar public and city work type buildings. What is a mud flood? The epic mud flood is a term that is coined to the event which occurred only a few hundred years ago during the end of the reign of the Tartarian Empire. Buildings hundreds of years old and located all across the world are known to be encased in a mud flow up to several stories high, and in some cases, even completely engulfing buildings entirely in nothing but mud. And you want to pay attention to this wording that these people use, okay? It says, they say buildings hundreds of years old and located all across the world are known to be encased. So they're saying that these buildings hundreds of years old are known to be encased. Well, known by who? Known by some pictures that somebody on social media is showing you? And they go on to say, this is a theory. You can also find buildings that have an age of only a few hundred years old and find them to also be buried in mud. The windows and doors of the upper floors of buildings are quite often found to be at ground level and occasionally even found to be completely buried underneath the surface of the mud that covered the entire area. So what I will add here, and now I don't know what's going on in all these Tartaria people's heads, okay? It is a huge deal on social media. Cha-ching, cha-ching. But they use a lot of these like statements like, yes, we all know this. No, we don't all know this. You people are saying you know this, but you've only proven it by sketches, right? That you found on the internet, right? And nobody's questioned any of these sketches. What was the Tartarian free energy? Churches, cathedrals, mosques, and other buildings of worship were originally aesthetic power stations, water stations, and sound resonating acoustical healing centers. The buildings that religionists use as places of worship in our present day originally functioned as hospitals or healing centers during the reign of the Tartarian Empire. Tartarian buildings are more similar in function to pyramids and have temples found across the world that are what we are led to believe by mainstream peer-reviewed science. Through ingenious engineering, intricate architecture, and advanced technology, the Tartarians transformed the earth into a circuit board powered by ether, just like the ancients did with the pyramids and temples. The crosses on top of Tartarian buildings were used as etheric electrical antennas that were connected to the rebar embedded throughout the building structures. Streetlights that existed during the reign of the Tartarian Empire were tall, aesthetic electrical antennas. These streetlights harnessed the power of the ether, which caused the gases inside the upper bulb to ionize and fluoresce. For all we know, the upper bulbs that sat on top of the Tartarian streetlights and found inside the home of the Tartars themselves were not made from glass, but quite possibly from a type of quartz crystal. If the pop culture phenomena started by the Radium Girls are any indication, then these bulbs could have contained various substances such as mercury or radium, which reacted with the ether, or maybe the bulbs contain nothing at all, and the crystal quartz itself is what reacted with the ether. Well, they certainly have theories about how all this stuff happened, right? And everybody, they all brush past this horse and buggy deal, right? And they're willing to reinvent our entire digestive tract to meet this story about Tartaria, right? That they didn't have bathrooms. I guess they're probably talking about during the Gilded Age when they didn't have indoor plumbing. What they're saying is, well, because the people didn't need to use bathrooms. Well, how about how about this? How about there's people on the game board, right? And they're trying to replicate what goes on in the society where we actually came from, like our home base, right? What if when they got to the part about the big homes they're building in New York, those grand structures and stuff, what about this? What about they got to the next part, right? And that's why they don't have bathrooms. Kind of a simple answer, right? So instead of rewiring our internal, our entire internal system, I think the people on the game board were constructing these houses for them to live in, and they had not gotten to the bathroom part there. At least that's how it appears to me, but you always have to have a story to surround the lie, right? And I'm going to be putting this on hold. What I'm going to be doing is this. I'm going to go ahead and upload this part just so we're all clear. I think this whole thing was created. I think the Tartars were really the Moors. They created the white people. And then they're the ones behind this whole Tartaria deal. And I'll have more evidence when I come back. But what's going on is I'm getting hit with so much radiation that talking is a pretty big event for me. So I'm going to be putting this on close for now. I'll upload this file. I think if we look at it from where I'm suggesting it go to, this is a game board flat out, okay? We come from an advanced society. What they've done in the telling of this Tartaria business, they're mixing things right and left. Absolutely mixing them right and left because they have all these theories about these fireplaces. Yeah, and then all the Jesus series get thrown into this thing. This thing is just a cut and paste kitchen soup of a whole bunch of different things. So I think it's likely as simple as that. They needed to make it complicated to hide what they destroyed, right? So that after they took all this over, and then what they immediately started doing after the Gilded Age, well, going to war, right? With World War One. So I'm way too tired right now to keep telling this story. So I will be back when I can. I do realize I also need to get back to tell you the story about the Iranian, place that had the eunuch, the Iranian power plants every day. Is Iran going to nuke us or not? Yeah, I'll tell that story when I can. I also will tell you the story about Peter Thiel, Rumble, and all this stuff about all this terrific spyware they have coming out of Israel. I don't think that any of it's necessarily true. This is all a cut and paste. It's also just one big money grab, right? Get everybody so afraid they'll sit in their houses and do nothing. There are some people right now that probably think communicating with me would be a bad idea because somehow they would get entrapped. Yeah, that's solidarity for you, isn't it, right? True solidarity. Run and hide. But anyway, not my point for today. So I'm going to be closing this off. I'm only about partway through this story, so look for me later today or tomorrow. Goodbye for now. Be safe out.